Okay, guys, I'm really excited to have Kiran come on the show today because he is an expert of the microbiome, and we all want to know how to improve our health and wellness right now and really focus on gut health because, as I keep writing and discussing every day right now with the coronavirus pandemic going on in our world, that gut health is essential because 80% of our immune system is in our gut. And I wanted to get Kiran. I kind of kept asking, and I know you're super busy, so you are the man to talk to about the microbiome. So thank you for making time for me and our listeners today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. This information is even more relevant now than it ever has been. So it's a great time to talk about it.
And I know a lot of, our health leaders in our society are all talking about immune system and supplements and everything. And what I want to educate people on is the importance of gut health and how the immune system is in the gut and how important the microbiome is to being strong and resilient to fight getting illness as coronavirus. And that's kind of what's scaring everyone now. And what is a positive, it's all of us in it together, as everyone keeps saying, around the world. It's pretty fascinating. But let's kind of talk about how the microbiome and chronic stress and the immune system are all connected.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, what this illuminates for us is how important it is for us to be resilient to a certain degree, right? Because right now we're facing something where there is no proven treatment, right? Nothing natural, nothing pharmaceutical. There is no proven prevention for it either. It's an unknown. Our bodies have never encountered this particular virus before. And so, now more than ever, what we're counting on is for our immune system to do the job that it's supposed to be doing every minute of every day, all the time. Mm-hmm. The problem we face is that we know that in so many people, in relatively young people and seemingly healthy people, the immune system tends to be dysfunctional. Right? This is highlighted by the immense prevalence of things like allergies and asthma and skin disorders like psoriasis and eczema and food sensitivities. All of those things are immune dysfunctions. It means the immune system isn't functioning the way it's supposed to. It's attacking things it shouldn't attack. It's elevating inflammatory responses to things it shouldn't be elevating. And frankly, it's just not functioning the way it's supposed to. And we also know that there's lots of data that shows that when the gut is dysfunctional and the gut is dysbiotic, that has a profound effect on how well the immune system functions. We also know in our Western world that our guts are epidemically dysfunctional. So, you're putting all of that together. Are our defenses, our natural defenses, up to par to deal with something like this? And this is where we start to fall and have all of the dangers that we face. And it's no surprise that as the coronavirus pandemic has moved from the East towards the West, we're starting to see younger and younger people being more affected by this, right? The CDC data shows that around 53% of the positive cases in the US are in people between the ages of 18 and 49, right? And it's no longer an old person disease that we originally thought of when this first started cropping up in places like China and starting to be in South Korea and Japan as well. Now we're starting to see New York, New York, which is the epicenter in the US, just reported, I think a few days ago, that 26% of their hospitalized serious cases are in people between 18 and 44, right? So it's younger generation, younger and younger people are being affected in a very profound way. We also know that one of the things that dictates how bad of a response one gets to this is how your immune system actually responds to it, whether it's your innate inflammatory immune response or you get this proper adaptive antibody response. And the antibody response will help your body clear the infection. It'll be relatively mild and it clears somewhere around 10, 11, 12 days. People are typically symptomatic for 5, 6 out of those 10, 11, 12 days. But after about 12 days, the virus is not detectable in the body and your immune system has all of these antibodies against the virus produced. The people that are getting the most severe responses, and this is not completely dependent on age, it can be independent of age, are the people that whose bodies and immune systems are mounting a really strong inflammatory response towards the virus. And those are the people that are ending up in places like the ICU and intensive care and so on, because when your body elicits a strong inflammatory response against something coming into the system, it's the immune response that is doing more damage than the actual virus itself.
That's a cytokine storm.
Yeah, exactly. That's what people are referring to as a cytokine storm. We see, the classical markers like interleukin-6 and interferon gamma, TNF alpha, all of these inflammatory markers, MCP1, being elevated in the response to the virus. And these are the same kind of responses that are occurring in people when they encounter food antigens, right? When they encounter proteins in the diet, when they encounter allergens outside in the environment, when they encounter pet dander, because it illustrates how dysfunctional our immune systems can be. And that's the danger. In my view, what we face in the Western world is this epidemic of immune dysfunctions, a lot of it driven by gut dysfunction. And those dysfunctions make us less resilient to these types of pathogens.
Mm-hmm. And I think I've been trying to, pull up some research articles and go through my books and put together how the immune system works, because, you say immune system, but no one really knows what that means. Because as I learned doing nutritional therapy and the FDM practitioner program, we go into digestion and you go into gut health. And we've talked to you a few times before on the microbiome, but can you kind of give a basic lesson to people how your immune system is in your gut and how that works the microbiome?
Yeah, absolutely. So what does it mean when we say the immune system is in the gut, right? That's a really important part of the question. I think a lot of people have a hard time conceptualizing that. Well, your body is made up of all types of different immune tissues and immune organs. Obviously, your bone marrow being really important. Everyone has heard of certain types of cancers where you need a bone marrow transplant or certain genetic deficiencies, because the bone marrow is where the factory of a lot of the initial immune cells are being produced. And it's not functioning properly, but that's a rare condition. Outside of that, we've got all kinds of glands. We've got a whole mesenteric lymphatic system. We've got glands all over in our throat that many of us have felt at some point were swollen because of an infection or something. Those are sites of action, sites of battles where things drain into the glands, immune cells come in and start fighting all those things. But then a lot of the immune tissue, about 80% of all of the immune tissue in your body, is in your digestive tract. It covers the lining of your whole digestive tract. Remember, your digestive tract has almost 30 feet of organ system that if you stretch it out. And so much of that part of the digestive tract is covered with immune tissue, meaning these are sites where the immune system is there, it's ready, it's waiting, it's communicating with things that come in, it's monitoring things that enter the body, and it's deciding in those places how to mount an immune response if it should. And what's crazy about the fact that 80% of immune tissue being in the gut, the crazy part about it is that every square inch of all of that immune tissue is covered by bacteria and viruses and other organisms, right? So here's your defense mechanism in your body, and the defense mechanism is covered with organisms. And as it turns out, there's something really important called a crosstalk between the microbes that live in your gut and the immune system cells. And the microbes that live in your gut are like the trainers of your immune system. They are the ones that are priming your immune system, are training the immune system to try to help the immune system figure out what to look for, how to defend the body, what's harmful, what's not harmful, and so on. Right? So they are the trainers of the immune system. That's what's so important about having a good, healthy, functioning microbiome, because 80% of your immune tissue is in your gut, where the largest part of your microbiome is. And that microbiome is talking to your immune system all the time. So that's a really important thing to understand when you hear the thing that people says, where people say 80% of your immune system is in your microbiome. So much of how your immune system decides to respond to something is dictated by its communication with the microbiome in the gut. That interface, that what we call crosstalk, is really, really important, right? So Hopefully people understand that. Now, let's talk about immune response in the first place. There's really two major phases of your immune response. There's something called the innate immune system, and then there's the adaptive immune system, right? We could just cover those two. There's loads and loads of details in each one, but let's give you the overview here. What tends to happen is if something foreign enters your body, let's say it's a virus in this case, the first reactors are supposed to be the innate immune system cells, right? And the features of the innate immune system are this. They are non-specific, meaning they can detect that something is wrong. They can detect there's a virus there or a bacteria or an antigen or a toxin or something that may not be good for your body. They can detect that and they can move to that site of action. When they move to that site of action, one of the things they do is they create inflammation. Inflammation is a quarantining of that area so that those things, whatever is there that's causing a problem, can't leak into the rest of the body, right? So the body uses inflammation as a way of quarantining, and inflammation is also a signal, if you will, to the rest of the innate immune cells to come in and start fighting whatever is there. So think about the inflammation as a fire to a firefighter, right? A firefighter is going to hop on a fire truck and they're going to go to where the fire is. Inflammation is that fire, is that signal. So you're going to get a bunch of cells that come in. Once they detect something is new, they're going to create inflammation. They're going to send out signals to recruit more cells that create more inflammation, and those cells are just going to start attacking everything in that vicinity, right? Now, that is a normal part of your immune response. The only thing is that part of the immune response is only supposed to last for a short amount of time until the more sophisticated and specific type of immune response, called the adaptive immune response, can gear up and show up and do more of a precise battle against whatever the invading enemy is. So here's the best analogies I try to give people. Imagine you've got a bunch of defenders in your home, and you're trying to fight against bugs that are entering the home, right? So imagine you've got all these defenders, and there are bugs that enter into the home in many different areas, mosquitoes and flies and so on. You've got a first line of defenders that use a blowtorch to defend against the bug that comes in. And then you've got a second line of defenders that are much more specific and have very specific tools for very specific bugs, right? So when a fly or a mosquito first enters into the system, the first line defenders get alerted, they show up, and there's a mosquito on your wall, and they're going to use a blowtorch against that mosquito, right? It's definitely going to kill the mosquito, but it's also going to burn the wall a little bit, and it's going to cause some damage. Now, if they just do that once, then you can repair the wall and everything will be fine. Until then, the mosquito specialist comes in. He has very specific tools he can use, and he can precisely get that mosquito one at a time without damaging anything else. That's the adaptive response. Now, if the blowtorch part is allowed to continue the immune response and the adaptive part doesn't come in, the whole place is going to burn down. That's what tends to happen with our immune dysfunctions, is the innate immune response, the super inflammatory, damaging immune response. If it's allowed to stay and orchestrate all of the immune response against the virus, then the system is going to get damaged and obliterated. The damage in the lungs that you see in this case, the damage in the gut that you see in this case in the COVID-19 are driven by your immune system. It's not the virus itself damaging the tissue. So that's the part that becomes really tenuous for people, is that so many people in places like the Western world have these dysfunctional immune systems where everything is responded to with a blowtorch, and the precision one doesn't show up for a long time or doesn't show up at all. And everything gets that blowtorch response. That's why we have significant allergies. That's why we get eczema and psoriasis. That's why we get food sensitivities and autoimmune conditions, because the immune system's gone haywire and just attacking everything it sees, and doing so with a blowtorch.
Very good analogy. You've been working at that.
Something I used that once in a previous recording. I was like, wait a minute, I think that makes sense for people to understand that, because immunology is super complex and super complicated. And people will say, like, I'm young, I'm healthy, I've got a strong immune system. Well, that's true for the most part. But do you have an allergy to something? Do you have food sensitivity? Have you ever had, a skin rash, or do you get skin rashes? Like, all of these things indicate that I've got a somewhat dysfunctional immune response, right? You don't have to be 70 to have a dysfunctional immune system.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's why they're refining the risk categories with this virus more and more. It's not just age. Age is one factor, but it's other pre-existing conditions, like asthma is a pre-existing condition, heart disease, diabetes, all of these inflammatory type conditions are all pre-existing risk factors.
Well, that's what I find fascinating is, as I started doing FDN practitioner work where we do the functional lab testing, and I keep writing and blogging and podcasting about this. Now it's like, here's a perfect example what happens, that you don't know what you don't know unless you test. And so so many people think they're invincible, and they have, oh, I'm good, I'm young. Perfect example. It's not just because you're 80 years old, it could be anybody. And there's so many hidden internal stressors that we talk about in FDN, and what I keep writing about. And I'm just doing that every day lately, just looking up research articles. How is the immune system related to the gut health, and how does that relate to chronic stress, and all these different signs and symptoms of gut dysfunction, which connects with immune system. And it is all those different symptoms, and it has nothing to do with age. It's just often is that, coming from chronic stress and living life kind of on the edge, maybe not sleeping, eating poor foods, environmental toxins. I mean, let's go backwards and go, how do we get dysfunctional immune system, and how does it get overloaded?
Yeah, and it's everything you just described. I mean, it's our environment to begin with. Even if we're trying to eat healthy, for example, the vegetables that are grown nowadays have somewhere around 50% less nutritional value than vegetables that were grown 30 years ago, because the soil is so depleted of nutrients. The soil in most of the farmland in the US is engineered soil. It's dead. It's full of chemicals. It's full of growth enhancers and all of these things that aren't natural and native to these plants. And so what you're doing is growing food that may look okay, but the internal health of the food is similar to our internal depleted health, right? So starting with just right there, starting with the food sources, even if we're making the right choices, we're still not quite getting the type of nutrition our body likely needs. And then just the toxicity in the environment, right? All of the chemicals that we come in contact with through our personal care products, through our homes, our carpeting, the glues in our shoes, all of these kind of chemicals. Some of the estimates I've heard is somewhere around 80,000 chemicals is the common amount that an average adult comes in contact with, just living life, just driving their car, going to work, living in their house, wearing their clothes. All of these chemicals, most of them are not tested in the human system. Then, of course, our food is covered in things like Roundup, glyphosate, these pesticides, herbicides, all of these things that have a huge impact on the gut microbiome, and of course our immune systems as well. Numerous courses of antibiotics, all kinds of chronic medication. Our water is full of chlorine and fluoride, and so we just have this very toxic environment. And then, not to mention the stress that you said. We have this expectation of being in this, what we call rat race, right? And that if you're not like running 100 miles an hour and doing a million things, and if you're not achieving at a certain rate, then you're really not contributing. Yeah. And you don't have a real important place in society. And so those kind of things that people put upon themselves cause stress. We know that stress is a big driver of leaky gut. Leaky gut is the biggest driver of chronic low-grade inflammation, and chronic low-grade inflammation is the biggest driver of chronic disease. So we become quite sick internally, although on the outside we may appear to be fine and healthy, right? So health is not necessarily dictated by your six-pack. It's not necessarily dictated by how fast you can run. Like we're saying, we're hearing people say, "Oh, I'm young and I'm fit." It doesn't matter if there's 15 foods you can't eat because your body can't process them. Yeah. It means you're not that healthy. Your body doesn't have the capability or the resilience to deal with these kind of antigens. And, and that all can become a risk factor in this case.
I know, it's like getting me fired up. This is all I've been doing the last week since I can't train clients and I've just been stuck at home. But it's just how to explain how chronic stressors, your external, all the ones we talked about, how they impact your gut health. And you just connected, I was drawing arrows on my, whoops, just dropped my pen. Arrows to everything. It's like chronic stress, microbiome, your pathogens, and asthma, and exercising too much, and diet, and how the immune system, it's all connected. So when we say we want to be able to have a strong immune system, especially with the COVID-19, that it is really essential right now. And I just get fired up, like, okay, is everyone doing everything they can right now to optimize their health? And why people, think they're fit and healthy, because I'm a perfect example of my story back in 2013 that I wrote about in my manual, that I thought I was invincible and fit and healthy. I was doing everything I thought, but I just redid my labs. What do they look like? Oxidative stress is in the red zone. I have leaky gut. I have pathogens. I have bacteria on my stomach, got your results, microbiome lab results back. But I think I'm healthy, but I'm not on the inside, and I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. But you don't know these additional internal stressors because they're hidden, and you have no clue unless you do lab testing. So I think it's so essential to get people motivated to, like, all right, reality alert, we need to take control of our health. And that's why I'm writing about self-care and how to, free advice, get to bed early, wear your blue blocker glasses, schedule time off social media, all these things. But it's crazy.
It is, and one of the potential silver linings with this crazy time that we're in dealing with this pandemic is that, it gives us time, those of us that can stay home, for example, and that there are, unfortunately, and to some degree, fortunately, a lot of people that have to be out because they're doing really important, essential work. We're all fortunate that a lot of those people are out there doing the work that we need them to do. But for those of us that can stay home, and we're spending more time at home now, it gives us a great opportunity to really reflect upon, what have we been doing with ourselves, right? This is a great time to reassess your diet. What are the things you're eating? What are the things you're putting into your system? How healthy are the relationships around you? Because they're really being tested right now. You're stuck in a home with a very small number of people. Am I sleeping enough? Am I getting enough mindfulness work? Am I doing enough self-care? These are the things that we can spend a little bit more time on right now that everything is slowed down. And hopefully when we come out of this, then we're a little smarter, we're a little stronger, we're a little more resilient, and we've got a little bit better perspective, right? And those are the things that some people have the luxury of doing, because there are others that are going through this that are disproportionately suffering. There are people that are suffering real economic loss right now. There are people that are suffering real health, issues. There are people whose loved ones are in the hospital really sick, and you can't go visit them because you can't be in that environment, right? That is a sickening feeling to think about, that you could have your wife or your husband or your child or your mom in a hospital fighting for their life, and you can't be there with them. There are people that are dealing with all of that. So if you have the luxury of not having to be dealing with a lot of that, to be able to be at home, then the least you can do is take this time to reflect upon how you can come out of this better and stronger and smarter.
Yeah, for sure. So I think if we can, it kind of talked about a little bit already, but how when stress is on, because I know a lot of people are stressed, we already have stressors in and out, and internal and external stressors that are chronic. But what does it mean for people to, when stress is on, the immune system's off? Because we often hear that, like, if I'm stressed, my immune system's turned off or dampened.
Yeah. So stress is, so there was this is a great way to explain it, because there was a paper in the Frontiers of Immunology that was published in 2015. And it was kind of a big kind of review paper on all of the impact that stress has on the system. And what they basically concluded was the leaky gut associated with stress is the biggest driver of global morbidity and mortality, right? Outside of communicable diseases. So communicable diseases are things that we can give each other, like COVID-19 and other diseases that we may pass on from one another. So if you take communicable diseases out, when we look at chronic illness, the biggest driver of morbidity and mortality worldwide was chronic stress, because chronic stress turns on the inflammatory cascades in the gut, and that leads to leakiness in the gut, and that creates this flood of chronic inflammation in the body. And virtually every major chronic illness can be traced back to chronic low-grade inflammation, right? So now stress response is also mixed, meaning there's acute stress where you get a short-term flight or fight response. Let's say something happens, like you get startled, right? Or something, you read something that makes you nervous. You get this elevation in flight or fight response. You get adrenaline flowing. You feel that, lightheadedness and all of that, the intensity in the breath. And then it should dissipate and go away. That doesn't really cause any significant health outcome. So that's a different kind of stress versus the kind of chronic stress that people are feeling all the time, that jaw clenching, tightness in the chest, nervousness, that kind of stress, the kind that doesn't allow you to smile throughout the day, right? That's the kind of stress that is really damaging. So being alert is fine. Being conscious of your environment is fine. If you're walking down the street and it's late at night and it's dark and you are a bit on high alert, your senses are tuned a little bit more and you're a little bit nervous and paying attention, that's totally fine. That goes back to our old response when humans were walking around and there were real predators that would jump out of a bush and eat you. So that response is fine. It's there. It's a survival instinct. Mm-hmm. But it's that chronic waking up in the morning feeling anxious, feeling out of control, feeling like all of the things in your life that impact you are outside of your control, and the things that are outside of your control you stress about. That's really the stuff that's damaging, that chronic constant feeling that people tend to have.
So that's going to create more the inflammatory response in their gut. And how does that influence the microbiome? Because I know that you're the expert on the microbiome. So how does stress in the microbiome and the good bacteria to the bad bacteria, how does that get shifted or altered?
Yeah, so it's really super interesting when you look at it. When you're stressed, you're going to release certain hormones. You're going to release, of course, cortisol is going to go through the roof, epinephrine, norepinephrine. All of these are the hormones that your adrenal system releases when you are under that kind of stress, right? And as it turns out, all of those hormones, all of the stress category of hormones, enhance the growth and virulence of latent bacteria and viruses in your system. So if you've had a bout of streptococcus or Klebsiella pneumoniae or cytomegalovirus or Epstein-Barr virus, if they are now latent and controlled in your system, a bout of stress and the release of these hormones actually trigger gene expression in these pathogens to make them more active and make them more virulent. Right? And it's an evolutionary adaptation for them because most of these pathogens are opportunistic pathogens, right? They're opportunistic in that they are not strong enough pathogens that they can infect a very healthy, robust system. So they wait, they lie in waiting, and they sit there and wait for the system to become weak. And when the system becomes weak, that's when they attack. They've learned to read one of the signals from the body which indicates weakness as stress hormones. So at the moment they feel stress hormones are increasing in the blood, they use that as a signal to go, hey guys, the system is weak. Let's amp up our replication and our attack. Right? So that's how that system evolved. And that's the same thing with the COVID-19. It's not necessarily the stress response, but this virus has evolved to use a marker, a receptor that indicates weakness and inflammatory response in the body. That's the ACE2 receptor. And that's how the virus kind of chooses its receptor. And it hasn't done this intelligently. This is through a series of evolutionary changes in the coronavirus family itself. but it's using a receptor that's not only ubiquitous in the body, you can find it in many tissues, but it's also using a receptor that is expressed at higher levels in people that are weaker and sicker, right? And so that's how it selects for the most likely target that it can replicate in very easily. So all of these microbes, the pathogenic ones and the opportunistic ones, have adapted to responding to signals within the body that indicate that the host is in a vulnerable or weak state.
Weak host.
Yep.
Wow. So I feel like this is a movie being written in our future.
Right?
Do you feel like someone in Hollywood's writing this? Like, is this really true? Is this happening in our world? Because it's so surreal. And it's crazy scary, but what are ways that we can, get our immune system stronger? And I know we've talked plenty about the megaspore biotic, and maybe we should talk a little bit about that before we end, and some self-care tips. But what can we do to get our gut stronger?
Sure, yeah. I mean, probiotics, fermented foods, fasting, and a good whole food diet are always great options for improving your microbiome. It's important to note also, that none of these things have been tested as a COVID-19 treatment or prevention. Mm-hmm. So we're not making that assumption. We don't want to insinuate that in any way at all. This is really about improving your resilience and improving the health of your system, so that you're more resilient in the face of things like this kind of pandemic. We know from our published studies, and of course from the huge wide usage of megaspore biotic, for example, that it increases the diversity within the microbiome dramatically. It also stimulates the Peyer's patches, which is a very important part of immune tissue in your gut. That's where most of your T cells and B cells all proliferate. What's important about that is these are the cells that you need to go out and defend your body against viruses and other pathogens that come in. A lot of that proliferation and stimuli occurs in that part of the gut. And we know from the studies that we've done that the spores in particular do a really amazing job of upregulating that part of the immune system and making your immune system a little bit more robust. We also know that the spores increase the production of short-chain fatty acids. And as it turns out, butyrate, which is one of the short-chain fatty acids, is really important for your circulating immune cells to utilize as fuel, so that they can continue on their patrols and look for invading viruses and bacteria and so on. So the gut plays a really important role. And as it turns out, this new pathogen, COVID-19, seems to infect the gut quite often as well. I was joking about it because I was initially making fun of all of the people that went crazy and did panic buying of toilet paper, right? Yeah. And we're like, what the hell is wrong with people? Why are they buying toilet paper? But the American Journal of Gastroenterology published a study showing that 53% of people with COVID-19 present first with diarrhea and gut issues. So I'm like, wow, how did they know that? So they figured out this virus before anyone else did somehow, and stocked up on toilet paper. Yeah. But it can infect the gut, and that leaves a weakening of the system, so that the rest of the body becomes even more vulnerable, right? So keeping the gut healthy and keeping the microbes there that help defend against invading species is absolutely critical. And so that's where a probiotic like the megaspore and the spore-based probiotic plays a role. It plays a role in just improving the robustness of your system. And then, of course, a whole food diet. We know, lots of colored fruits and vegetables, plant-based foods, healthy protein. All of these things play an important role in providing the micronutrients and the macronutrients that your immune system so badly needs. And then, of course, you can't overstress the importance of things like stress management and getting adequate sleep. This is a real important time to get adequate sleep, because all of this repair and cleanup in your body that makes your body function more efficiently, the stuff we call mitophagy, which is the detection and removal of dysfunctional mitochondria, and then the other removal of fragmented DNA, all this autophagy, these cleanup of dead and dying cells, removing all of that debris and regenerating tissue, all of that stuff happens during sleep. And so we need that regeneration time so our system is optimal. And then, of course, there's a dozen things we can practice with hygiene as well to reduce our risk.
And intermittent fasting, would that be beneficial too then to help the cell autophagy?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the intermittent fasting increases all of that cellular cleanup quite significantly. Intermittent fasting also increases growth hormone levels, and growth hormone is really important in rebuilding the tissue. And so any sort of tissue damage or cell damage, and you need to regenerate your tissue, whether it's immune cells or smooth muscle cells or skeletal muscle cells or nerve cells, any of the cells that are being damaged, just as functioning as a human in day-to-day life, is enhanced by the process of intermittent fasting. As it turns out, intermittent fasting also increases the diversity of the microbiome, like the spores do. And so that in itself is really important for that crosstalk with the immune system, the increased diversity of microbes within the microbiome.
And I would think like having collagen, bone broth, and getting glutamine and all that kind of stuff to help our gut health, as well as like our prebiotic food to feed the microbiome.
Totally, yeah. Polyphenols are really important, becoming more and more important now, because polyphenols, which are the colored fruits and vegetables like berries and all that are high in polyphenols, those get converted to things like urolithins in the gut by specific type of microbes, and these urolithin producing microbes start to grow and diversify in the gut, which actually makes you abundantly healthier. But the urolithins that they produce actually are really important for regenerating new mitochondria in your cells and in your system. So they play a really important role in the regeneration process and the providing of energy to the mitochondria, which of course is a powerhouse of all your cells. So getting all that into your diet becomes extremely important right now as well. We can't, at the end of the day, right, our only defense right now, besides the social distancing and the hygiene practices, which are extremely important, which you should do, the only personal defense outside of those is improving the state of your system and the robustness and the resilience of your system. And all of those things should be on the table right now, all of the things we talked about.
Everything we've been talking about for 10 years on this podcast.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, that's what's so interesting about this time that we're going through, because, you know, this really illuminates and highlights how potentially sick this population is, right? Mm-hmm. Because the virus has evolved to kind of target a marker in the body that indicates weakness and indicates systemic inflammation. You know, it illuminates this idea that, wow, we have a lot of people that are sick. And that makes us much more vulnerable to something like this as a population, right? It's not just the 70-year-olds and 75-year-olds and above. It's not anymore. Mm-hmm. That was based on data that was coming out early in the infection in China and in Japan and so on. Now, as it's moved to Europe and the US, the picture is completely changing. There are loads and loads of 30 and 40-year-olds that are in the ICU fighting for their life right now, who are quote unquote seemingly healthy, right? But
that's the whole thing of what I do for a living now, is to help people realize are you fit and healthy on the inside out? And this mm-hmm. is just a great example that we're not superhuman, superheroes, and so resilient as we think we are.
We're not. And just because we don't have cancer, just because we don't have an autoimmune disease or some sort of major chronic illness, it doesn't mean we're necessarily healthy. Yeah. You know, we have to take stock of everything that's going on in the system, right? And what's happening on the inside, the inflammation that's going on in the inside, all of that dictates your resilience.
So I know we're running out of time as always with you to ask you questions for hours. But the other things I keep finding, I did a whole article. I was actually helping a client with her protocol, but then I started going down a rabbit hole as usual and looking at Quicksilver. Had a great scientific Quicksilver labs Dr. Shade had on detoxification and how do you know if your elimination pathways are clogged or not. And I'm like, you know, this is so relevant to what people are going through now, because if you have a lot of toxins in your body, you're not able to have, if your liver is congested, your detox 1 and detox 2, phase 2 pathways are not functioning at optimal level, and you're not peeing, pooping, and sweating right to eliminate your toxins. It just seems like that's another way to increase your stressors that are in your body that would, I'm sure, it correlate with gut health and immune system, as well as mitochondria.
Absolutely. Yeah. The toxic burden in the body really negates repair, negates optimal immune function, negates proper cognitive and cerebral function. All of those things are impeded significantly by the amount of toxicity and the toxic load in the body. And fortunately, we've got natural mechanisms in the body to remove these toxins on a regular basis, but these systems can themselves become overwhelmed and get run down. And so the ability to utilize smart nutrition to detoxify your system to a certain degree, again, that's another benefit. Everything we talk about in functional nutrition, functional medicine, all is on the table and is even more relevant now as we're trying to take stock of how resilient am I really, and if I encounter this virus, am I going to be okay? We can't say that just because you're under 70. You don't know that, right? It's all the things you've been doing to your system. And the beauty of the human system, and this is the best news about all of this, is the human system can change very dramatically, very quickly, right? So given the right circumstance, the body can move towards healthy resilience faster than we think. The microbiome can change in a very positive way in a relatively short amount of time, in a 1 week, 2 week period. Just changes in your diet, adding 1 or 2 good behaviors to your daily routine, like sleeping more, meditating more, maybe sitting in a sauna a little bit more, doing some really good kind of core work and low intensity exercise that just stimulates your nerve system and your skeletal muscle system to a certain degree. Just simple behaviors like that can make a profound change in how your body responds to the world around you. That's the good news. We're not all genetically deficient and stuck with the way we function. We can change it, and that's why these kind of programs and understanding this kind of information becomes really important to be able to kind of take action steps on your own to make those positive changes going forward.
Yeah, I've been doing all that. I haven't walked in my neighborhood so much.
Yeah,
and my abs are going to be super strong by the time I'm done with this, because I keep doing these half-hour workouts I make my husband and I do each morning. And then yoga. I'm getting my yoga practice back in, doing Barry Baptiste yoga. I posted on Facebook. He's on YouTube. So I'm starting this April yoga challenge. Who wants to join me? Do it 2-3 times a week. So I did it. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm horrible. I used to do it 5 times a week. I taught yoga for years, but I haven't been doing it. So that's my gift in all of this, is doing stuff I haven't been doing for myself and being able to have more time to, I'm starting to write a little ebook on the self-care with WHOLESTIC Method, and doing all these things that now we're like, oh, I'm at home 24/7.
Right.
And you're feeling relationships, another positive. Luckily, my husband and I, he's my all-in-one husband, my chef, my workout partner, and best friend. So it's like, this is really a test of your relationship, because we're both working at home here all day. I haven't left the house since last weekend, so it's Thursday today. So it's like, this is really to see how strong a person you are.
Absolutely. No, it's an interesting time, and I hope everyone that can stay home does stay home. I think it's so important that we don't act as a reservoir for this virus, and we don't act as a vector for it as well, right? Because this is the kind of virus that will bring our entire system down to its knees and create havoc for years to come. But we are the source. We are the vector. We are the resource for the virus. So if we stop transmitting it to each other, and if we stop being a reservoir for it, it'll go away, right? It's not something that's in mosquitoes or in in the ponds, and it's not something coming from ticks. It's in us, and we have all the power to stop it.
Is that just by getting our immune system stronger and each person taking self-responsibility and ownership for their own well-being?
Absolutely. It's about, understanding the importance of this whole social distancing program, right? The idea is that, like, for example, like take me, for example, in my home, I've got my 2 kids and my wife, and that's who we've been together with for the last 2.5 weeks. So we are staying just within that group. We're not introducing any potentially new vectors into our group. Even my mom, who wanted to come visit a week and a half ago, I'm like, sorry, as hard as it is to say no to your mom, I said no, because number one, at that point, we didn't know if we were potentially carriers, and we didn't want to give it to her, and we didn't know if she was a carrier and give it to us. And so we're staying confined in our own space, in our own bubble, if you will, to mitigate us being a transmission source for this virus. Mm-hmm. If we were going out, if we were still having play dates for the kids, if the kids were going and playing at the neighbor's house, or I was still going out to the gym where other people are and those kind of things, then any one of us could pick it up and act as a reservoir for the virus and then transmit it to 2, 3, 4 other people, who will then transmit it to 2, 3, 4 other people. And before you know it, one person can transmit it to 200 people within a couple of days. That's how fast it transmits. It's more contagious than the seasonal flu, right? It's almost 2 times more contagious than the seasonal flu. And the seasonal flu is contagious enough to spread to almost 40 million people in a 5 or 6 month period. This thing is twice as contagious. So in a 6 month period, if we don't do something to contain it, it goes to 80, 90 million people, right? So, and with a mortality rate of 1%, that becomes a lot of people. That's 800,000 people losing their lives. And it's not going to be just old people. We know that, right? At least 25, 30% of those that lose their lives are going to be people 18 to 44 or 18 to 49.
So you think this will eventually stop, though? I mean, we just keep the social distancing for probably, I assume, another month, and some people say longer. But is that eventually the virus going to die because it stops spreading, or how do we get rid of it?
Yeah. So the idea is, if we did, and there's numerous models and lots of historical epidemiological data to follow, but some of the best models show that if we did really strict social distancing for 5 weeks, right, then for the most part, the virus would be removed from our society. And let me explain how that happens, right? So let's say we start that today. And for the next 5 weeks, for example, we're all going to be just kept within our little small bubbles.
Yeah. Don't go to church on Easter.
Exactly. And Mardi Gras. Now look at, there's a recent article I saw today where New Orleans is seeing this huge spike in cases, and it's likely due to all of the gatherings that occurred in Mardi Gras just, a couple weeks ago. Chicago, 1 week after all the St. Patty's Day celebration, where people still went out to the bars like crazy, a week after that, we saw a huge rise in cases, right? And it's all about people getting together and spreading it to each other. So let's say we started this 5 week, really, really strict social distancing program, no gatherings of more than a couple of people at a time outside of who you're stuck in your household with. Starting today, everybody that currently has the virus, we already know, right? So we know they can be isolated, tracked, treated as needed. A big majority of them can be treated and managed at home, which is great. And then a percentage of them, up to something like 13%, would need to be in a hospital setting. And so those people can be in a hospital setting, but isolated and kept under quarantine. So none of these people can spread it to anyone else. There are also a large percentage of people that have it right now that don't know they have it, because they're asymptomatic, and you can be asymptomatic for up to 2 weeks. But all of those people within the next 2 weeks will know that they have it, or either their body completely clears it and they never knew that they had it, right? And so 2 weeks from today, everybody that currently has it and knows that they have it will either be treated and recovered, or will succumb to it. And the people that have it right now that don't know will know that they have it in 2 weeks, right? So when you start the really strict quarantine and the social distancing, within 2 weeks of the start of that, we would already have a much better idea of how many actual cases there are in the population. And then we have to start testing everybody that shows any risk, and everyone that has symptoms and then everyone they're in contact with has to be tested as well, so that we get better and better idea of where the pockets of infection are. And then 3 weeks after that, all of those infections will be cleared, assuming they were all quarantined, and then the transmission of the virus will be completely gone. And that's a highly simplified version of the epidemiological model, but it can happen. It can completely go away. Now, we got fortunate with the first SARS, right? The SARS-CoV and MERS, which are basically gone, right? Those are the other coronavirus pandemics. The advantage we had with those, which were much more lethal infections, much more lethal viruses, but they weren't transmissible until you had symptoms, right? So it became easier to go, oh, that person has symptoms of SARS or MERS, let's quarantine them and isolate them until they're cleared, and then they can't transmit it, right? So the moment you start feeling symptoms, you get quarantined, and then the virus is dealt with in your body, and then you're done being a reservoir. You're not giving it to anyone else. The problem with this virus is you can have it and not know it for 2 weeks. And you could be transmitting it to a whole bunch of people without knowing it. So if you're at a bar and you're a restaurant, you're getting together with friends, you could be giving it to all of them without knowing it. That's why this kind of lockdown thing is so important.
That's why I keep saying it's important to isolate yourself, because you don't know. Do you think it is 14 days? I mean, how do they know for sure it's 14 days that it will stay or be gone in 14 days? I mean, is that accurate, or is that estimate?
That's the best estimate based on all of the cases that they followed so far. The good thing is there's lots of brilliant scientists out there working around the clock on figuring this thing out. Lots of epidemiological infectious disease experts all around the world, and there's good collaboration in the scientific community. Unlike governments, when you start dealing with governments and politicians, they don't do a good job of collaborating with one another to help the situation. But scientists across the way have been collaborating. Chinese scientists who got a head start on this and really started to understand the virus early on have been sharing data with European scientists and North American scientists who now have good amount of accumulated data. And then now that we have so many cases in the US, they have an opportunity to follow lots of infections here in the US as well. And that 14-day period is about accurate. The average incubation period is 5.2 days. So the average person will show symptoms within the first 5 days. But they've shown that it can go as far as 14 days to show before you show symptoms. So that's why it's put at that timeline.
That's good. Sheesh. Well, I'm sure you're swamped keeping track of all this science and research and connecting with those guys. So I appreciate your time. And I really wanted to get this out to our followers and to my own community, because I think it's important information. As you just said, it's hard to get the truth out there because of the politics involved in it. And you have to find out, get those scientists to speak without political influence so they can say what the truth is. So thank you for being our person, our go-to man to be the expert in the microbiome and health, and explaining how chronic stress and the immune system, gut health, and the microbiome is all connected. And so it's so important for everyone to take care of the whole you, and taking care of your sleep and reducing that stress, and really eating good food. Because I see people lined up at the drive-thru at McDonald's down the street buying, look at what people buy at the grocery store. So really take ownership of your own health, and remember, get empowered by wellness and taking care of all those different things we keep talking about. So thank you, Kiran, and we'll put the link in the show notes for any information on microbiome labs and research you want to find. I can add it in there. So thank you.
Thank you. Take care.